Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for Draft.Com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, episode 33 of the 2020 podcast series, getting you ready for the NFL Draft, April 23rd through the 25th. That's right, we're just a week away before the Cincinnati Bengals will officially be on the clock. First ever virtual draft. We're in unprecedented times. Not only are we sheltering in place, but that also goes for each of the NFL franchises. War Room is really going to look differently for each of these teams. They're all going to be working virtual, so you're going to have a lot of phone conversations, a lot of FaceTime, a lot of Zoom, a lot of Skype. And really, all of the prospects will also be sheltering in place, so it's really going to be different. Once a guy is drafted, he's not going to be able to jump on a plane and fly to a facility. So it's really going to be an interesting time to see how the NFL manages all of this. And really the coverage, by the way, ESPN, ABC, NFL Network, all covering the draft. What are their broadcasts going to look like? You know, again, unprecedented times. We don't have a stage. We don't have that beautiful black backdrop of the Bellagio fountains there in Las Vegas. What's going to happen with this draft? It's really going to be interesting, but look, I know that COVID-19, sheltering in place, I've talked about this with my last few podcasts. I want to continue to do the podcast. We're going to do this all the way up until the draft, give you an outlet, a release, something that we can talk about and really enjoy together. Take our minds off of anything else that's happening in the world right now and just talk about the draft. So the last 8 podcasts have really been dedicated to kind of a roadshow, if you will, taking a look at each of the NFL franchises by division, breaking down what the rosters look like with the free agency and what the team needs really look like after that, and what a 7-round mock draft might look like for each of the NFL franchises. So we covered every single division. The last division that we talked about was the AFC West. That was in episode 32. And now what we're going to do is we're really going to go position by position, take a look at where the draft stock is for each of these players, take a look a little bit at the history of the positions in the NFL draft as well, because as much of covering the NFL draft is about this year's draft, it's also taking a look back at history and really try to predict based on what's happened previously, what we can kind of project will happen in 2020. So we're going to talk about the quarterbacks. We're going to talk about running backs today. So got a lot to cover, a lot of players here, so we're going to go ahead and jump right into things. When you talk about the quarterback position, a season ago, we had 11 quarterbacks taken, 3 of those in the first round: Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, Dwayne Haskins. Drew Lock was taken number 42 overall in round number 2. He was expected to go in the first round, ultimately fell to the second. And then after that, Will Grier, Ryan Finley, and Jarrett Stidham taken in the first 4 rounds. Gardner Minshew was kind of that sleeper Minshew mania there for the Jacksonville Jaguars, taken number 178 overall. When you look at the quarterback position, you have, the last time we had fewer than 3 quarterbacks taken in round number 1 was 2015. We only had 7 quarterbacks taken in that draft. If you recall, 2015 was the year that Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota came off the board 1-2. Not a very deep, not a very strong quarterback class that year. Following up with that, though, in 2016, I think the league was really desperate to find some quarterbacks, bringing those in. You ended up with 15 quarterbacks taken, and a lot of guys who are still on NFL rosters, not just the men at the top. That's the draft with Jared Goff, Carson Wentz going 1 and 2. Paxton Lynch ended up being a bust there for Denver at 26 overall. But Jacoby Brissett taken in the 3rd round. If you recall, that's also when Dak Prescott was drafted, number 135 overall in the 4th round. Nate Sudfeld and Jake Rudock, a couple of backup quarterbacks there in round number 6. So, in 2016, 15 quarterbacks taken, 3 in round number 1, 6 taken in the first 3 rounds. In 2017, very top heavy quarterback draft, Mitchell Trubisky taken with the number 2 overall pick. You got Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson going 10 and 12 respectively. The Chiefs and Texans both trading up to get their quarterback. And I think we're going to see that this year. We're going to talk about where I see Jordan Love going. And I think you're going to see a team that trades up into the draft to ultimately land their quarterback. So 2018, what's crazy is in 2018 you had 5 quarterbacks taken in round number 1. And then after that, just one in the 3rd round. And then it was really backloaded after that with 7 quarterbacks taken from the 4th round on. And obviously, in 2018, 5 quarterbacks taken in round number 1. Hadn't seen that before, especially with 4 quarterbacks also taken in the top 10. I've heard all kinds of rumors and talk that there might be 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 10 of this year's draft. Let's not get carried away. We've got some good quarterbacks here, but I don't know that we would get into 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 10. And really, when you look at the class, you have Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, all starters for the respective franchises. Then there's Josh Rosen. Really the question mark there, is he ever going to be able to realize any of his potential? And then Lamar Jackson, the Ravens again, trading back into round number 1 to land him at number 32 overall, the reigning MVP. 2019, I mentioned the 3 quarterbacks, a total of 11 quarterbacks taken, just 5 in the first 3 rounds, and then 6 taken in rounds 4, 5, and 6. So 2020, what does that draft look like this year? And really, when you look at this draft class, to me, I think there are ultimately going to be 4 quarterbacks taken in round number 1. And you're going to say, Greg, I took a look at your website and I saw, on readyforthedraft.com, you only have 3 quarterbacks being taken in round number 1. And that's true. But the biggest thing is I wanted to make sure that I got the team right with this. And Indianapolis does not have a first round pick. And I ultimately think that that's where Jordan Love is going to go. And I'm not going to predict any trades or anything like that in my mock draft. I think Jordan Love is going to end up going to Indianapolis, and that's ultimately where I had him penciled in. I think Chris Ballard got his defensive tackle, traded out of round number 1. But I think what he's going to do is he's going to look at the quarterback position. He's got Phillip Rivers. And look, Phillip Rivers is not going to be the long-term answer for the Colts at the quarterback position. Tremendous career, Hall of Fame worthy career there with the San Diego and Los Angeles Chargers. He's moving on. And then you have Jacoby Brissett. And Jacoby Brissett was a guy, the team thought that he might be that franchise quarterback for them, especially after Andrew Luck abruptly retires. Phillip Rivers is only signed to a 1-year deal, 1 year, $25 million contract. Jacoby Brissett, by the way, also a free agent at the end of the season. Colts need to figure out what they're going to do with their quarterback. And so I think Jordan Love makes a whole lot of sense. And so when I look at Jordan Love, this is a guy, I look at exactly how this is going to play out. The teams at the top of the draft, I don't see anyone looking to trade out of the first round. But what I do see, I see 3 teams sitting there at 18, 19, and 20 who have multiple picks in round number 1. Miami sitting there at number 18. They've got 3 picks in round number 1. They have number 5 overall, 18, and 26. The Raiders, number 12 and number 19. And then the Jaguars at number 9 and number 20. Those are the teams. I think that's really where Chris Ballard is going to target, trying to get back into the first round to get their quarterback. And I think that's ultimately why Jordan Love is going to be in the first round conversation. So if you're scoring at home with that, that would be 4 quarterbacks taken in round number 1, which would be, the most since 2018. And then if you were to go back even further, when was the last time you had 4 quarterbacks taken in round number 1? Well, you'd have to go all the way back to 2012 when, the aforementioned Andrew Luck was taken number 1 overall. That was the same draft with RG3, Ryan Tannehill, and Brandon Weeden. So 2 out of the 4 quarterbacks taken in round number 1 of that draft are still in, were still in the league 2 seasons ago. And then Andrew Luck with the retirement. And Ryan Tannehill, you saw what he's been able to do, resurrecting his career in Tennessee. RG3 is a backup, but in terms of his career, really derailed by injury more than anything else. So I look at this. I think ultimately we're going to have 13 quarterbacks taken in the draft. And I think after the first round, there could be a couple of quarterbacks sprinkled in the second and third round. We'll get into those quarterbacks. And then I think everything's going to kind of be backloaded at the end of this draft. So Joe Burrow, obviously going number 1 overall to the Bengals. Much talked about, leading the country in completion percentage, passing yards, QBR, the touchdowns thrown, 60 touchdowns. I mean, it's just insane. The video game type numbers that he and that offense put up. Joe Brady coming in. Joe Brady's now in Carolina. His offense, he's been able to showcase and show that he was able to get it done there as a coordinator, bringing it in from the Saints. And now he's in Carolina with Matt Rule, and Teddy Bridgewater. He was able to work with him in New Orleans. Teddy Bridgewater's now the quarterback there for the Panthers. So I look at Joe Burrow and number 1 overall, that I think that's really a no-brainer at this point. He swept all the major awards, including that landslide victory in the Heisman. A guy who, look, if Tua had been healthy without the hip, we'd potentially be talking about Tua as the number 1 overall prospect. But the performance that Joe Burrow had in 2019 was special. And you can say, well, look, the last quarterback that only had one true year of success in college that was taken in the top 5 was Mitchell Trubisky. And we all see what happened with him in Chicago. He hasn't been able to live up to that billing. But I'd argue, you look at Joe Burrow and the development, you don't just transition from being a late day 3 pick or possibly a free agent to being the number 1 overall pick. There's no accident there. It's not like you can just luck your way into it. This is a guy who has the talent. His intangibles are off the charts. This is a guy who knows where to go with the football, makes all the right reads, sees the entire field, the anticipation, the ball placement, the accuracy, decision-making. He makes the right decisions, too. He knows where to go with the football, finds the open man, and then, look, he also knows when to pull the ball and take off and run. Doesn't do it on every down, but, this was a guy who I think it was over 40% of his rushes led to a first down. So when you talk about that, to me, that screams decision-making. He knows what he's doing out there, and I think, with Cincinnati, Zach Taylor, a guy, who is in the Sean McVay coaching tree. I want to see what he can do with Joe Burrow. And look, there are weapons there for him. He's got AJ Green. He's got John Ross. He's got Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, the running back. I think they get him 1 or 2 more weapons in the draft as well. I think they need to get him a tight end, another running back. And we'll see what happens. I think it's going to be fun, though, to see Joe Burrow, what he can do year 1 in the NFL. So number 2 on my list is Tua Tagovailoa. And look, Tua going to Miami, the tank for Tua at the beginning of the season. This is a guy who, again, had it not been for the injury, had it not been for the hip, he could very well have been the number 1 overall pick. I mean, that's really what we have to understand is Tua another special player? And again, the anticipation, the ball placement, throwing his receivers open. That was really the biggest thing. When you've got speedsters like Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs III and Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle, you have to, when they get open, put the ball on them. Or lead them and allow them to cut up the field and make plays after the catch without breaking stride. Tua was a master at that. He's not the biggest guy, 6'1", 218 pounds, but you look at the stats, just under 70% completion percentage, over 7,400 yards, and 87 touchdowns with just 11 interceptions. This was a guy, again, his freshman year didn't play a ton. So when you look at the stats, it's kind of, really loaded in those sophomore and junior season. The junior year, he only played 9 games. Freshman season, the lights weren't too bright for him. He comes in the national title game against Georgia. They're down, and he ends up willing that team to victory. And so, to me, I think Tua, you take that franchise in Miami, and The biggest concern, obviously, is going to be the durability. I don't think there's any question about his playmaking ability, his play as a quarterback, the intangibles, everything's there. It's going to be those injuries and the injury history. And I don't think it's so much even that hip alone. The hip is checking out. The surgeons are coming out. ESPN reported 2 surgeons came out and said he's going to be ready by training camp, and that everything's completely healed, that he's on the mend, and that everything should be fine, should make a full recovery. But not only does he have the hip and the posterior wall injury there, he's also had 2 high ankle sprains where they had to do the tightrope surgery there. Invasive surgery, ultimately getting everything locked in place there with the bones for that high ankle sprain. And then he also sprained his knee against Missouri, sliding. And really those things all happened while he was outside the pocket. Tua has to be able to stay within the confines of the pocket, can still manipulate the pocket like he does, so well. The subtle movements left or right, being able to step up when he needs to, find the alley and be able to let it fly and find his open receivers down the field. But man, getting outside, rolling, outside the pocket, that's really where it's nervous time. And so I think there are teams that are concerned, and the Dolphins, they've been talking about how much they want Tua, and now all of a sudden the tune has changed out there and they're saying, no. Justin Herbert is the guy that Miami wants. I don't know that that's true. You've been talking about Tua, tank for Tua. Everything's been talking about Miami going Tua. And then all of a sudden you're going to throw that curveball in there. Justin Herbert? I just don't buy it. And here's the thing. Here's the reason why. Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, the other 2 quarterbacks that we're talking about in round number 1, I think there are too many question marks. Way too many question marks for me to be comfortable taking either quarterback in the top 5. Now, granted, the Chargers are sitting there at number 6. That doesn't really hold that argument too much, but there are question marks, and that's really the biggest thing that worries me. And I look back to 2018 and Josh Allen. Josh Allen was taken number 7 overall, and I think that makes more sense for guys like Justin Herbert and Jordan Love, because he had some question marks to his game. Ended up being the number 3 quarterback taken in the draft. And so I think Tua still ends up going number 5 overall to Miami. Let's not overthink this. Let's not overcomplicate things. But you got to be able to take care of this kid. You got to make sure that he can stay healthy. And that's going to be the biggest question mark, because look, RG3 again, taken number 2 overall by the Redskins. He looked like he was going to be an all-world performer, but he's a player that wanted to play outside the pocket. Injuries really derailed things. Cam Newton, his body's been wearing down because of all of his play outside of the pocket. So these guys have to really take care of their body and stay in that pocket and be more of a pocket passer. I think Tua can do that. He doesn't have to be outside the pocket. This guy is dynamic enough to stay within the pocket and be able to make those throws down the field. That's really what I want to see from him. And I want to see it in Miami. We'll see what happens from there. Justin Herbert, again, number 6 overall to the Chargers. I think he's the number 3 quarterback still at the end of the day. He's a big kid. He's 6'6", 230 pounds. And look, what he's done in Oregon for the 4 years, represented that university well, came in as a freshman and put up some major stats. Got injured, battled injuries his first 2 seasons. So here's another quarterback with some injury concerns. But look, 34 touchdowns, 9 interceptions in those seasons while throwing for over 3,900 yards and over 65% completion percentage. And then as a junior, kind of, the numbers fell off a little bit, 3,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, but under 50% completion percentage in his first season under Mario Cristobal. And look, Mario Cristobal, what was interesting his senior year, he wanted to come back and really solidify his status, because he could have come out into the draft in the 2019 draft and could have been a first-round quarterback. When I look at Justin Herbert in 2019, the offense wasn't revolving around him. He had more of a balanced offense. And what Mario Cristobal really established was a physical power running game. A stable of running backs, powerful offensive line. And Justin Herbert, look, he had the luxury of having the big arm and had some weapons on the outside. And look, the Ducks ultimately beat the Wisconsin Badgers after winning the Pac-12 conference, and they win the Rose Bowl. So at the end of the day, when I look at Justin Herbert, there are a lot of things to like about the kid. 95 touchdowns, just 23 interceptions, throwing for over 10,000 yards, 64% completion percentage. Has the NFL arm, can make all the throws, can throw the ball from the near hash to the wide sideline, on a line, deep ball accuracy. The biggest thing is look, I'm not saying that he can't complete the intermediate throws. He can put the ball on the money, back shoulder throw away from the defender to the outside along the sideline for 15, 20 yards. He can throw the wheel route, drop it in over the tight end shoulder, the running back shoulder. But the concern is the consistency with that. Those intermediate routes tend to sail on him at times. And it's one of those things that touch being, the other thing too is he wants to put the ball on the receiver's ball side hip. What's going to happen with that, instead of leading the receiver, throwing him open, allowing the receiver to go get the football, attack the football in the air, and not break stride is when you put it on that hip, where's the corner going to be? If you've got a crossing route, if you've got one of those in-breaking routes, corner's going to be right there on that ball side hip, and they're going to be able to make a play on the football. So, some dangerous throws there from Justin Herbert. And then, they talk about the leadership qualities. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about that at all. He's somebody who I think is a proven leader. You see what he's been able to do with the Ducks, and it's been well talked about what he showed at the Senior Bowl and the Combine. Players love to play with this guy. And look, the Ducks, it's not the first time they had an introvert there at Oregon. Marcus Mariota, came to Tennessee as a number 2 overall pick. He did okay for himself, his first few years. And it's, with Justin Herbert, I think getting to the Chargers, playing with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, I think they're going to look for some additional weapons for him there in the draft. Also a running back to replace Melvin Gordon. Austin Eckler's already there. Man, if they could get Jonathan Taylor, I think that'd be ideal. That would be awesome. And then get a couple of receivers. I have them taking Quintez Cephas in round 4, Isaiah Coulter in round 6. Give him those weapons. Hunter Henry, a tight end. They franchise tagged him. I think that makes a whole lot of sense to me. I look at Justin Herbert. I see some comparisons with Josh Allen. There are some questionable accuracy at times, but there's no doubt that there is that playmaking ability. Look, he ran a 4.6 840 and wasn't asked to really make a lot of throws down the field in that game against Wisconsin in that Rose Bowl, but he had 3 rushing touchdowns leading them to victory. So that athleticism absolutely comes into play. So moving on from Justin Herbert, we're going to take a look at Jordan Love as our next quarterback. And Jordan Love, look, tale of 2 seasons, right? 2018, tremendous year under Matt Wells, over 3,500 yards, completes 64% of his passes, 32 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, had a bevy of receivers to throw to, had a 1,000-yard running back in Darwin Thompson, played in the Super Bowl there with the Chiefs, had 4 all Mountain West Conference offensive linemen. And then 2019 happens. Matt Wells and his offense coordinator move on to Texas Tech. In comes Gary Anderson. He loses 9 offensive starters. All 4 of those offensive linemen, gone. His top 5 wideouts, including Darwin Thompson, all gone. And the production was ridiculous. Over 2,300 yards lost there. He only had 1 receiver that had 10-plus receptions. So when you talk about building rapport with your receivers, you saw that out of Josh Allen. That was really the big issue with Josh Allen a season ago, or a couple of seasons ago. And I said, his stats weren't all that impressive, from at least an accuracy standpoint. As a sophomore, as a junior, you saw it regress even further. For Jordan Love, he had a tremendous 2018. In 2019, just under 62% completion percentage, still had 3,400 yards, but 20 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. The decision making just really went out the window. This is a guy who was a little, he was rattled. He wasn't making the right decisions. He wasn't making the right reads. And he was trying to force things, trying to do too much with all the talent that's around him. And I think he really needs to work on getting his confidence back, frankly. And so I look at Jordan Love, and I think there are some skills there because, look, Justin Herbert, he's a guy that just wouldn't let it rip. He would wait too long before he would actually get rid of the football and allow the defenders to recover. He'd have a wide open receiver, and he would wait an extra count before not trusting his eyes, just waiting, over analyzing things, and by that point the defender's already recovered. Just grip it and rip it. And Jordan Love, I think that's one of the things that I can really appreciate about him is that he does make sure that he's throwing the receiver open. He has excellent touch to go with that tremendous arm, and he has the athleticism. I look at Jordan Love, if he gets into Indianapolis with Chris Ballard and company, with an offensive line that's led by Quentin Nelson, you got T.Y. Hilton, they're going to get another receiver to go along with him, and a running game that's, I think, underrated with Marlon Mack leading the way. I think it'll be interesting to see where Indianapolis falls. They get that franchise quarterback, though, in round number 1. Again, I think that makes a ton of sense. So after that, there are 4 quarterbacks that I think you could see potentially come off the board in round 2 or round 3. I have them coming off the board in round 4, and I have them all kind of bunched together. And that's Jacob Eason, Jake Fromm, Jalen Hurts, and Anthony Gordon. And we'll talk, really go in order of how I have them coming off the board in round 4. And the first one is Jacob Eason out of Washington, going to the Buccaneers. And look, the Bucs are going to need a future quarterback. They have Ryan Griffin on the roster behind Tom Brady, Jameis Winston no longer there. So yeah, once Tom Brady ultimately calls it a career, they're going to need to have somebody on the roster that's ultimately going to take over the reins. But they're not going to take that guy in round 1. And really, I don't think they're going to take it on the first day of the draft. I really don't. And the reason being is they need to win now with Tom Brady. Be all in with Tom Brady now. Get the offensive line, get the weapons, and then look at a quarterback after that. And I think Jacob Eason is a guy, some people have talked about him. Let's just stop at the first and second round consideration there for Jacob Eason. Let's not fall in love with the big arm. I remember Kyle Bowler, years back, would drop to a knee, throw the ball 65 plus yards down the field. Everyone was enamored with this huge arm, but he couldn't complete passes. Under 60% completion percentage. And you saw what happened there with the Ravens, a guy who really struggled to put everything together. And so when I look at Eason, Georgia, tremendous freshman year, still completed just 55% of his passes, but a guy that was leading Georgia as a true freshman, gets injured in 2017. Jake Fromm comes in, and the rest is history. Eason decides he's going to go back home. He's from the Seattle area, moves to Washington, plays for the Huskies in 2019, ends up completing 64% of his passes, over 3,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. And yes, he does have a cannon for an arm. There are few players in this draft who can make the throws that Jacob Eason could throw. All the throws in the route tree, puts everything on a line, but that's the issue. Everything's a fastball with this guy. He throws it so hard, he doesn't have any touch. The trajectory on it, it's always on a straight line. And yes, there are some throws where you need to put the ball on a line to a receiver, but if you're trying to put it, let's say, over the linebacker in front of the safety and drop it into a receiver in zone coverage, you're going to need to put some touch on that football. And I just don't see that out of Jacob Eason. You see him overthrowing receivers, ball sailing left and right. And that's really the biggest concern that I have for Eason. I think he needed another year of seasoning there, at Washington. But look, Chris Peterson retired, Jimmy Lake's in there as the head coach. They had some continuity there with the Huskies, but Salvon Ahmed ultimately entered the draft, and Aaron Fuller, Hunter Bryant, some of his weapons were leaving as well. So Jacob Eason entering the draft. I think Bruce Arians is looking for a big, strong arm quarterback that he can mold. Jacob Eason fits that bill. I think Jake Fromm out of Georgia, we just mentioned him, and Mr. Fromm, at 6'2", 215 pounds, not the most physically imposing quarterback, but it's the intangibles. It's what he has between the ears that is so impressive for me. The pre-snap reads, he's making the checks at the lines, knows where to go with the football, reading defenses, blitzing linebacker over here. I'm going to put the ball right behind him on a slant, understanding what the defenses are doing. And look, I think he has a better arm than people really give him credit for. The biggest issue is, for him, honestly, was Georgia's offense was really designed for that running game. And he wasn't asked to throw the ball down the field, all that often, to be perfectly honest. I thought in 2018, what was his best year? I think we've heard that before. 67% completion percentage, over 2,700 yards, 30 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And in 2019, look, and again, the more yards than he had in either of the other 2 seasons, over 2,800, 24 touchdowns is 5 interceptions, but the completion percentage dropped to just under 61%. And there were some easy throws that he left out on the football field. And that's one of the things that's frustrating. You wonder if some of those throws, had he had a better arm, would he have been able to get some of those balls? Would he have been more accurate? And I look at the Patriots, though, and you talk about a guy who doesn't necessarily have all the physical skills, all the physical tools coming out of college. A guy, though, who is incredibly intelligent at the quarterback position. Sounds a lot like Tom Brady, right? Bill Belichick. You pair him up with a cerebral quarterback. They do have Jarrett Stidham there in New England. Is there a chance that the Patriots can end up taking a quarterback in round number 1? Sure. Could that be where Jordan Love falls? Absolutely. I think, they'd have to at least consider it. It just doesn't feel like something that Bill Belichick would want to do. I think he would wait to take a quarterback to pair up with Jarrett Stidham, really have that quarterback battle to see who's going to lead the Patriots in 2020. I just don't see it being a first-round quarterback. I just don't. I could be wrong with that. Bill Belichick really hasn't had to have that decision, given the fact that Tom Brady, the GOAT, has been there for so many years. But Jake Fromm, a similar quarterback, I think, to Tom Brady. I'm not comparing him to Brady, but similar style, a quarterback. And I think it would be a nice fit there. Jalen Hurts, this guy is so impressive. A guy, 6'1", 225 pounds, just solidly built, a kid who was a power lifter in high school, and legendary there at OU, posting on social media after games in his football pants and pads, just took his shoulder pads off and then went to work in the gym. This guy's a tireless worker, and for 3 seasons there at Alabama, he led Bama as a freshman, and they won a national title. The biggest thing for me with Jalen Hurts is what he was able to do in I'm sorry, they didn't win the title, but in 2017 allowed Tua to ultimately take over as the quarterback there in Tuscaloosa when it all counted. At the end of the season there, you knew at some point Tua was going to be the guy, and Jalen Hurts ultimately acquiesced, allowed him to go ahead and take that job. 2018 was the starter, and he, every step of the way, he was dialed in, was locked in. He was there with Tua, and you saw him out on the field, was always he was the first guy to meet Tua after a lot of the plays, a lot of the touchdown, a lot of the big plays. And then when he needed to, when they were, he was called upon in that SEC championship, Georgia's down, Tua's out with an injury. What does he do? Jalen Hurts leads Bama to victory. So what happens in 2019? Grad transfer, Jalen Hurts goes to Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley, the quarterback whisperer, back-to-back Heisman Trophy winners. And what does Jalen Hurts do? He finally becomes that Heisman finalist. Second to Joe Burrow in the Heisman voting. And you look at the numbers, man, just under 70% completion percentage, 3,800 yards passing, 32 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, also rushed for just under 1,300 yards and 20 touchdowns. Dynamic season. And he was unlike anything that Lincoln Riley had before. He was a power runner. He was more like a Cam Newton than a Lamar Jackson or anything like that when you compare him. But look, I look at Jalen Hurts, and I think he still has a long way to go at the quarterback position. I think Lincoln Riley's done a lot to develop him because really he was more of an athlete, a guy that was going to run around outside the pocket. And really Alabama's offense allowed him to make plays down the field. Look, in 2017, Jalen Hurts, when he was the captain of that offense, threw for 17 touchdowns, just 1 interception. So a lot of, correct decisions that were made there in the Bama offense. But look, he was also playing with, some tremendous talent there with the Crimson Tide. And I'm not saying that he didn't there at Oklahoma, but essentially what you saw out of him was one read and go for much of the season. If my number one option was not open, I'm pulling the ball and I'm looking to run. You saw that especially in the FAU game and the UCLA game to start out the year. As it went on, though, here's the thing with Jalen Hurts. You saw the development. You saw him, continuing to read defenses, to look down the field, going through some progressions and seeing the field, hitting his, the secondary or tertiary receiver, making some of the right decisions, knowing when to pull the ball and run. And I thought that was one of the things that was really fun to watch. I live in Oklahoma, so being able to watch every single game that he played in the Crimson and Cream, that was really, a lot of fun to watch. And to have, him revered by both schools. Alabama loves this guy. They were pulling for him there at OU, and then the same thing at OU. He shows up, different kind of leader. Not the outspoken leader like Baker Mayfield. Kyler Murray, really soft-spoken. Jalen Hurts, look, man, this guy, he was not only a lead by example, but he's not afraid to step in front of the mic and offer up some of that criticism. Hey man, we didn't play well. And he's not afraid to. He was always. It seemed like he was always hard on himself. We can be better. We can always be better. We can be doing things better. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about Jalen Hurts. But look, at the next level, he still has a ways to go. This is a guy. He needs to see the entire field. He needs to make sure that. That arm, the throws, that, the ball placement, some of the anticipation, doesn't always throw with great anticipation. He's going to have to work on that. Some of his receivers, that offense, they were running wide open. So he was hitting a lot of wide open receivers, allowing to buy time with his legs. Receiver comes free and he's hitting a wide open target. Not always going to be able to do that at the next level. So that's one of the things I think Jalen Hurts is going to need some development. And I look at Minnesota. They've got Kirk Cousins in there for another 2 seasons, but after that, is he going to be that franchise quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings? I don't know that he is. I don't know that he's the answer. And I think Jalen Hurts needs a couple years of seasoning. Minnesota could bring him in as the backup, and then after Kirk Cousins' contract is up, you may see Jalen Hurts as the starting quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. Just saying. I think he can fit. And then at the end of round number 4, I've got the Eagles taking Anthony Gordon. They're trying to capture lightning in a bottle again. Minshew mania, going to the Jaguars at round 6. You had Nick Foles, didn't really work out. So Gardner Minshew stepped in, and you saw what he's been able to do with the Jaguars. Anthony Gordon, look, he's another Mike Leach product, and a guy who has a quick release, tremendous accuracy, over 5,500 yards passing, just right around 70% completion percentage. And I think he's somebody. Look, Carson Wentz can't stay healthy. You've got Nate Sudfeld there as his backup. I think they need to bring in another quarterback. They really don't have anyone behind him. Allow somebody to come in and challenge Nate Sudfeld for that backup position, that backup role, because Carson Wentz, can he stay healthy? There's no 100% guarantee, so you have to be ready in the event he does go down. So then we transition to the quarterbacks, like I said, that were really going to be on the back end of the draft. And I look at a guy like Nate Stanley. I think he's really the next in line. If you saw what he did at Iowa, look, this is a big kid, 6'4", 245 pounds. He has a big arm, can make all the throws that you want. And, the stats, sure. I mean, at Iowa, he played well, 3 seasons as the starter, under 60% completion percentage. I worry about that, but over 8,200 yards passing, 68 touchdowns, 23 interceptions. The biggest thing for him is the consistency. He's a guy, his downfield accuracy was suspect at times. And if you put on film against USC in the Holiday Bowl, you'll be like, wow, I did not see that in that game. He was precise, he was accurate, and he was making throws all over the field, hitting wide open receivers, throwing receivers open, and making all the right decisions. It just didn't happen on a consistent basis. And that's what I worry for Nate Stanley. That's really the biggest thing. And so I think he falls to I have round 6. And I'm looking at the Lions. You've got Matthew Stafford there. His backup's going to be Chase Daniel. I look at a big, strong arm quarterback to back up Stafford. Stafford got a clean bill of health with his back. And, Chase Daniel, I think that'd be a nice backup to learn from. David Blau filled in nicely for Matthew Stafford a season ago. And so I think you have something potentially there with David Blau, but you bring in Nate Stanley, battle with Blau. And, I don't think that you're necessarily, Chase Daniel is a guy who's, he's over 30 years of age. How long is he really going to be there on the roster? Daniel signed through 2022, 3-year, $13 million contract. And yeah, he's 33 years of age. So, that's going to be a question mark, in terms of he'll be the backup and allow Stanley to really learn from him for a couple of years. And then after that, let's see what happens. James Morgan out of FIU, a quarterback that people aren't really talking about, but I have him penciled going into the Chicago Bears in round number 6. And the reason being is, the Bears really don't know what they've got, really what's going to be happening with Mitchell Trubisky. They brought in Nick Foles and then Tyler Bray. I think they need that third quarterback, the third option. Trubisky, questionable. Nick Foles didn't really work out there in Jacksonville. Is he going to be, can he really return to his Super Bowl type form? And there's a big if, there's a big question mark there. And I think, the model of efficiency was James Morgan there this last year at FIU. He was a transfer from Bowling Green, struggled mightily there, but moved on. And at FIU this past season, struggled, a little bit from a completion percentage standpoint, but over 2,500 yards passing, 14 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Look, 2018 was his best year. 65% completion percentage, 26 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and a guy who, I think he has a quick release. I think he sees the field, sees everything down the football field. And I like him as a quarterback. I think he has the right makeup to be a quarterback at the next level. And so I think he'll end up making the roster and will challenge for a backup in a couple of years. In round 7, I look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, and now that Nick Foles is off the roster, I think they're going to need to find another quarterback. Yes, Minshew Mania is there, but I think you need to find a quarterback there to really put on the roster. The only other quarterback there is Josh Dobbs, so Jacksonville has to find a quarterback at some point. And the guy that I'm looking for with them is Tyler Huntley out of Utah. And the thing for him, his game isn't going to be the big arm throwing the ball down the field, 60, 70 plus yards. It's his athleticism. And that's really what is impressive about him is he's a guy that can make plays with his feet, buy time, and showed really an ability to understand the offense there at Utah and was extremely productive and extremely efficient. 73% completion percentage for over 3,000 yards, 19 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions. And look, on the ground, this guy ran for over 1,100 yards and 16 touchdowns in his career with the Utes. I think he's worthy of a 7th round selection. Look, he wasn't invited to the combine, but that's okay. I still think he's a guy that can end up getting drafted there in round 7. And then another guy to really keep an eye on is Josh Love out of San Jose State. This is the guy that I watched play for the Spartans. And the more I watched him play, 6'2", 205, not the biggest guy, but he had a really, really strong arm. The ball jumps off his hand, really a quick release, and really had command of that offense. Over 3,900 yards passing for the Spartans, 22 touchdowns, 8 interceptions on the year. And look, the Spartans not really known to be that juggernaut, that powerhouse in college football, but you look at what he was able to do. He threw for over 300 yards, let's see, on a couple of occasions, but then it was the 400-yard games. He had, threw for over 400 yards in that upset victory over Arkansas, 49-32, threw for over 400 yards against New Mexico, Nevada, and again against Boise State. Really had a nice, solid game there. Struggled from an accuracy standpoint, and that's really, I think, was kind of the difference there against Boise State. 53-29 was the final, but then he also throws for 400 yards against UNLV, 3 touchdowns but 4 interceptions. Really, shakiest game in terms of his accuracy, throwing the ball to Rebels, as much as he was throwing the ball to Spartan receivers. But I think he has that makeup, a guy that I think can last as a backup, as a third quarterback potentially on an NFL roster. And I'm looking at Josh Love coming to the Packers. I think, Aaron Rodgers isn't going anywhere as a quarterback, so, we can, that's not why I'm penciling him in there. But you look at the guys behind him, he's got Tim Boyle and Manny Wilkins as backup quarterbacks. I think Josh Love can come in there and challenge for the backup role and could potentially win that backup role. I think he has enough ability there to be able to do that. And then Cole McDonald, I have him as the last quarterback coming off the board, going to the Titans, be a backup there for Ryan Tannehill. And look, Cole McDonald was a guy out of Hawaii, a lot of hype coming into the season, over 3,800 yards passing, 36 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, some big throws, 400 or 500 yards passing days. And then you look to 2019, shows up on the field against Arizona and throws 4 interceptions in his first game, gets benched in favor of the freshman Chevin Cordero. And look, this guy really, 8 of his 14 interceptions were thrown in the first 4 or 5 games. When it really counted in Mountain West Conference play, he really stepped up and really played well and led Hawaii to led them to a victory. Ultimately led them to the Mountain West Conference championship game and then to a bowl game victory. They ended up losing to Boise State in the Mountain West championship, but redeemed themselves with that bowl victory. And look, threw for over 4,100 yards, 33 touchdowns, the 14 interceptions. But, the way that he ended his season was really what you want to talk about more than anything else. And I think that's the thing that makes Cole McDonald a draft eligible prospect, is his ability to continue to develop throughout the year. And I think that's one of the things. He didn't regress. He didn't really fall into a hole. He didn't fall off the planet and ultimately have a freshman take over his job. No, he ultimately rebounded. And if you go back and look at things, he had, let's see, 4 interceptions against Arizona, another 3 against Washington. So his biggest team, the biggest competition, 7 interceptions against those teams. So yes, that is cause for some concern. But after that, let's see, his last 10 games, only throws for 5 interceptions, but ends up throwing for 20 touchdowns. So 20 touchdowns, just 5 interceptions in those last 10 games. So a guy who was able to turn things around, and really what you were able to do there with Hawaii was they were able to ride things with him. And so I think he is draft eligible. The one thing, or draft worthy, I should say, the one thing that I do have concern for with him is this kind of looping delivery. And he needs to shorten that delivery. That wind up is just going to be cause for concern. You have to have a quicker release at the next level. But Tannehill, Logan Woodside, they need another quarterback in that QB room, and I think it's going to end up being Cole McDonald. So those are my quarterbacks. If you're scoring at home, that's 13 quarterbacks taken in the draft. According to my mock draft and really what I'm looking at with the quarterback position. Other quarterbacks to garner some consideration could end up in the back half of the draft, potentially be priority free agents. I think you've got to look at Brian Lewerke out of Michigan State, a guy who, the completion percentage is scary. Also threw 47 touchdowns, 32 interceptions. That's a cause for concern, but very athletic there for the Michigan State Spartans. I think Jake Luton out of Oregon State, really an underrated player, 6'6", 230 pounds, big quarterback, a transfer from Idaho, played 3 seasons there for the Beavers. And look, 42 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, over 62% completion percentage. The biggest thing was injuries more than anything else. I think derailed some of the momentum that he had. Steven Montez at Colorado, playing in Boulder. Look, he played for more than one quarterback. More than one head coach there. 63 touchdowns, 33 interceptions, 62% completion percentage, over 9,700 yards. He stepped in as a starter when Sefo Lufau went down as a redshirt freshman. Athletic kid, 960 yards on the ground, 11 touchdowns. The consistency is what worries me. You watch him at the combine, he throws a couple of decent throws, and then some terrible throws. And that's the thing that you really saw. That was the story for Colorado, and why they couldn't really gain any momentum in the Pac-12 conference was Steven Montez was shaky there at the quarterback position. So I think he could end up getting drafted. I had him penciled in as being a drafted quarterback at one point. And, I just think there's too many inconsistencies to his game, but I do think he'll end up getting a chance as a priority free agent. Then there's Kelly Bryant out of Missouri. A guy, look, again, over 1,200 yards on the ground in his career, 17 touchdowns, tremendous athlete, has a strong arm. He was able to showcase that at Clemson, but ultimately lost his job to Trevor Lawrence, transferred to Missouri, and, played in 10 games there with the Tigers, and just really couldn't gain any of that momentum that he lost, after transferring from Clemson. I think he's a big kid. He's over, he's 6'3", 6'4". I think he'll get a shot at the next level as well. So that's the quarterbacks. We're going to transition to the running back position. And when you talk running backs, and a season ago, only one running back taken in round number 1, and that's really the big story. How many running backs are going to be taken in round number 1? For a time there, we didn't have any running backs taken in the first round, and really that was because the game was changing. 2014, 0 running backs taken in the first round, and that was a draft that Carlos Hyde, I think, was the Devontae Freeman was taken in the 4th round. Top running back taken in that draft actually was Bishop Sankey at number 54 overall in the 2nd round. So since then, though, you've had quite a few running backs taken in round number 1. Let's see. 9 running backs taken in the first round, 2015 through 2019. And last season it was Josh Jacobs, but a lot of running backs, a lot of running back depth a season ago. Miles Sanders, productive there for Philadelphia. Darrell Henderson should have more of an impact with the Rams now that Todd Gurley's gone. David Montgomery should be the starter there in Chicago. Devin Singletary doing his thing with the Bills. Damian Harris should get more playing time there in New England. Alexander Madison showed that he could fill in for Dalvin Cook there in Minnesota. Justice Hill got some playing time in Baltimore. Benny Snell, same thing in Pittsburgh. So there are some running backs out there. Ty Johnson got to play a little bit there for Detroit. Darwin Thompson was a 6th round pick. So you can go all the way down this list. Even Myles Gaskin, number 234 overall, got playing time with the Dolphins. So a draft class that I was pretty impressed with overall with its depth. 25 running backs taken, and I'm looking at this draft this year, and I think it's a real top-heavy draft. I only have 1 running back going in round number 1, and I think that's more so because you have depth at a lot of other positions as well. But I've got in rounds 2, 3, and 4, I have 11 running backs coming off the board. And that's the highest since 2017 when there were 13 in those three rounds. Now, I only have 19 running backs that I actually think will be drafted. That's the lowest number since 2016. So when you talk about the draft class itself, you're like, wow, I thought you said that there was depth to this draft class. Why is this the lowest number? But I think it's more quality than quantity when you're talking about this running back class. And, it all starts with DeAndre Swift and Jonathan Taylor. To me, I have Jonathan Taylor as my number 1 running back, DeAndre Swift number 2. But I think DeAndre Swift, because of his versatility and, a guy who's already proven to be a pass catcher, I think he'll end up being the guy that's drafted in the 1st round. He's more NFL ready as a workhorse, if you will, a guy that can be that 3rd down back or that 3 down back. And, with Swift, I have him going to the Dolphins at number 26 overall. Look, the Dolphins need a running back. I mean, they've got Kalen Ballage. They've got Myles Gaskin as their top returning running backs. Jordan Howard was brought in, but I think he's a guy who's going to be more of a complimentary back. They need to have a guy who's going to be the playmaker, and I think that's going to be DeAndre Swift. Now, look, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. I think with Swift, there isn't a whole lot of wear on his legs because he's shared the backfield with running backs his entire career. Shared the backfield with Nick Chubb. Shared the backfield with Shoney Michel. share the backfield with Elijah Holyfield, and now Brian Herrien, Zamir White. The list goes on and on. A lot of running backs there, really a stable there at Georgia, and he was still able to really set himself apart as the top-rated running back in this year's draft on a lot of people's boards. And so I think that really speaks to his character as well, that he didn't allow that to really mess with him. It was more so, hey, you know what? I'm going to shine when I have the ball in my hands. And 20 touchdowns on the ground, just under 2,900 yards as well, 73 receptions in his career with the Bulldogs. I really like what his skill set, what he brings to the table. His lateral agility is something that you really have to talk about as well. Can put his foot in the ground, make cuts up the field without really losing any momentum. Ran a 4.48 40 at the combine, 5'8", 212. So he's powerfully built as well. Dolphins makes, I think that's a perfect match. So then you transition to round number 2, and check this out. Jonathan Taylor, Wisconsin running back, going to the Chargers in round 2. You lose a Wisconsin running back in Melvin Gordon. You gain a Wisconsin running back in Jonathan Taylor. Yes, you re-sign Austin Eckler, but look, Austin Eckler is not going to be a guy who's going to be that every down back. I think he needs to be more of a complimentary guy. And you bring in Jonathan Taylor. Look, 5'10", 226 pounds. We knew he was fast, around that 10,400 meter speed in high school. Shows up at the combine, runs a 4.39 40, 36-inch vertical leap. So he's got some lower body explosiveness. And then you're looking at him going, well, he's a big dude, but can he make those cuts? Is he quick laterally? And a 701 3-cone drill. When you talk about the 3-cone drill, that's going to really showcase a guy being able to sink his hips and being able to make those cuts. And that was the 4th fastest. And this is a guy who he was the biggest of those running backs that completed the 3-cone drill. That in terms of the top 4, he was the biggest running back. 226 pounds, and being able to do that, to me just says this is a guy who has the athleticism to make those plays. And look, he burst onto the scene there in Madison and took the college football world by storm. Almost 2,000 yards. Look, he was 23 yards shy from having 3 straight seasons up with over 2,000 yards. That's never been done in the FBS. He's one of only 2 running backs with back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons, and that was just him and Troy Davis, if you remember him from the 90s at Iowa State. Incredible. Incredible with the production. 50 touchdowns on the ground as well. And one of the things, Melvin Gordon wasn't known as a pass catcher in his time at Wisconsin. Jonathan Taylor, look, he only had 16 receptions in his first 2 seasons combined, had 26 in 2019, really wanted to showcase him as a pass catcher. And he looked to be one of the more comfortable, if not the most comfortable pass catcher at the combine. Really fluid, soft hands, securing the football before getting up the field. Looked like he really worked on his hands, and that really gives me the confidence there for Jonathan Taylor, and that's why I have him penciled in as my number 1 quarterback. I think he has the highest ceiling of any of the running backs in this draft class. And he's a guy, he has the physicality, he runs you over. You see the vision and the patience. Waits for his line to set up their blocks. And once they're locked on, he looks for that cutback lane. Once he sees it, puts his foot in the ground, no wasted movement, cuts up the field without wasting any, losing any speed. And once he gets into the open field, he can make you miss, he'll run you over, and then he'll run by you. So to me, I look at Jonathan Taylor. The biggest issue, the reason why he's not a number 1 running or the first round running back, I think at the end of the day is going to be the 18 fumbles and 15 fumbles lost in his career. That's the biggest concern more than anything else with Jonathan Taylor is the ball security. I think if he can hold on to the football at the next level, he's got star potential, in my opinion. After that, I've got 2 other running backs coming off the board in round 2. I was trying to see, if I could potentially fit Clyde Edwards-Helaire in there. I really like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think he's that little bowling ball, that Maurice Jones-Drew type player. Could he go to the Buccaneers? Could he go to the Rams in round number 2? I think it's entirely possible. I actually have J.K. Dobbins going to the Buccaneers. And the reason being is, look, J.K. Dobbins, very versatile running back as well. what he's able to do at Ohio State, burst onto the scene, shared the backfield with Mike Weber, and rushed for over 1,400 yards as a true freshman. Just really showing you what he could do. Went over 2,000 yards in 2019. And again, another guy who has that shiftiness, that lateral agility, being able to set his, and what I really appreciate about him is that when he's setting somebody up in the open field, he's setting a guy up from 7-8 yards away, and some subtle movements, a head fake, and being able to stop on a dime and cut back the other direction. Look, man, those linebackers and DBs don't have any chance. And then the 71 receptions, soft hands, a guy who I thought was really a weapon there for Justin Fields this past season, especially, and showed up at the combine. Didn't run the 40, but did put up 225 23 times. One of the stronger running backs in the draft class. Has shorter arms, but that's really not going to come into play too much. And he actually has a pretty good stiff arm as well. 5'9", 209. I think J.K. Dobbins, number 3 running back in this draft class. So I think the Rams sitting there in the second round, their first pick. They released Todd Gurley, kind of a salary dump, if you will. Also, really has never returned to form after the knee issues. And they could go Clyde Edwards-Helaire here, but I'm actually going in a different direction. I'm going Cam Akers to the Rams. And Cam Akers, for me, he's my number 5 running back. But I think in terms of what the Rams want to do, I like Cam Akers here. And look, Cam Akers was another guy burst onto the scene as a freshman, and you saw the power, and you saw the speed, over 1,000 yards with just under 200 carries. Really set himself apart, even with Jacques Patrick, the upperclassman there on the roster. In 2018 under Willie Taggart, really was lost as a running back, I thought. He wanted to always bounce everything to the outside, wouldn't really see the cutback lanes to the inside, and really that's where it got him into trouble. Teams would string him out, and he would still try to bounce it to the outside. Even when he had cutback lanes back to the inside, he would ultimately get some help back to the inside, and that's really where daylight was, and he was still looking to the outside. I don't really know what happened there, but ultimately it didn't work out. Returned to form though in 2019. He was running with more confidence, more decisiveness with his running. Again, over 1,100 yards this time, 14 touchdowns, 30 receptions as well with 4 touchdowns through the air. So really more of a confident runner. Over 2,800 yards, 27 touchdowns on the ground, 69 receptions and 7 touchdowns in the passing game. I think he's a versatile weapon. Has that power to go along with the speed. Showed up at the combine, ran a 4.47 40, 5'10", 217 pounds. Yeah, go ahead and pencil him in there with the Rams. Again, I think Edwards-Helaire could potentially go to the Rams, but I think he's ultimately going to fall to round number 3. I think that 4.6 40 at the combine might scare some teams away a little bit. And I'm actually looking at the Cardinals in round 3, and the Cardinals have Kenyon Drake. And then Kenyon Drake is that speedster, but I think they need some thunder to that lightning. And I'm looking at AJ Dillon. And if you're looking for a guy, and this is a copycat league, teams are going to be looking to try to find their next Derrick Henry, and I think it's going to be that AJ Dillon could very well be that guy. 6 foot, 247 pounds. Everyone was talking about, hey, this guy's going to break, 4.4, run some incredible numbers. Look, still at 6 foot and 247, he ran a 4.5 340 and showcased a 41-inch vertical leap. So lower body explosiveness there with this guy is absolutely there. What he was able to do at Boston College, again, burst onto the scene as a true freshman and was just ridiculous. Over 1,500 yards on the ground, 14 touchdowns, 3 straight seasons, over 1,000 yards. In 2018, he was really bothered quite a bit by a high ankle sprain, played in just 10 games, still over 1,100 yards, was a workhorse for the Eagles. In 2019, despite the fact that he was sharing the backfield with David Bailey, over 1,600 yards on the ground, 14 touchdowns, also had 13 receptions. Wasn't much of a pass catcher in that offense, but really that was more of a run-oriented offense. Some of their receivers were really more like they were big. They're more undersized tight ends more than anything else. They're utilized a lot as tight ends, receivers. And one week you'd see him penciled in as a receiver. The next week they'd be a tight end. And so I look at Dillon. He has the power. The big question that a lot of people had was, does he have a burst? I think he has enough of a burst there at the next level, or at the second level. He has the ability to run you over. He has a powerful stiff arm. He has some lower body explosiveness, which tells me that he does have that cutback ability. You saw that time and time again with his game. Wasn't all he'd run away from guys at times, but he didn't always have that burst. I think it was more of the long speed than anything else. But I think AJ Dillon and Kenyon Drake would complement each other well. I think that'd be a nice fit there in Arizona. Moving on, I mentioned the Lions. I mentioned Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think this is really a match made in heaven. If I'm Matt Patricia there in Detroit, you've got Darrell Bevell there as the offensive coordinator. Kerryon Johnson has some injury concerns. Yes, there's Ty Johnson on the roster. Bo Scarborough, your bigger wide receiver. Bigger running back, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire, look, 5'7", 207, not the biggest guy in the world, ran a 4.6 40, but look, he's quicker than he is fast. He's not going to be a guy that's going to have that game-breaking speed, 39-inch vertical leap, and that shows, again, the lower body explosiveness. That's really what you want to see out of a lot of these guys, and that's, the combine validates that. Validated the fact that you saw this guy with his elusiveness in the open field, his ability to cut on a dime. You saw that even at the national title game, a play on the sideline, and his ability to stop on the ground, stop on a dime there in along the sideline, and showcase some really good balance as well. This is a guy has that low, he's low center of gravity, really built, powerfully built, 5'7", 207. This guy's just a big ball of muscle. And yes, he does remind me a lot of Maurice Jones-Drew, and a guy who can beat you between the tackles. He has, that burst on the outside, can make you miss in the open field, but really where he's going to do a lot of his damage is in the passing game. So yes, he rushed for 1,400 yards and 16 touchdowns for the LSU Tigers, but he was a main weapon there for Joe Burrow. After Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, who was the number 3 receiver? It wasn't Thaddeus Moss. It wasn't Terrace Marshall. It was Clyde Edwards-Helaire. 55 receptions for this running back. And he had over 453 yards in the passing game as well. To me, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, if Kerryon Johnson has issues staying healthy, I think Edwards-Helaire is the guy that can come in and end up being a starter there for the Lions. Staying in round number 3, I'm looking at Zach Moss out of Utah. And the thing, Zach Moss is one of those guys, if he can stay healthy, he could end up being a steal in round 3. But I think some of those injury concerns, ran a 4.65 40 at the combine. He's 5'9", 223 pounds. Speed isn't going to necessarily be his game. I think he has that power between the tackles, has that stiff arm as well. A guy who just continues to get better as the game wears on. You saw Utah against USC. Zach Moss gets injured, has a shoulder injury, out for the rest of the game, and because of that physicality with the way he runs, he does have to battle some of those injuries. Utah was lost without Zach Moss, and ultimately USC ended up beating Utah. But look, 3 straight seasons, over 1,000 yards, 1,400 yards in 2019. Also has 66 receptions, very soft hands, knows how to score, 38 touchdowns on the ground, very powerful runner, powerful stiff arm, runs with a low pad level. And I look at where Zach Moss, where I see him going, I look at the Chiefs. And, the Chiefs, yes, they have, Damian Williams played very well at the, in the Super Bowl. You have Darwin Thompson, was able to contribute as a rookie. But I think what you need is to add that power element. These are guys that are more athletic guys on the outside. Add that power. Zach Moss is really going to be that power there for Kansas City. I think that would add an additional weapon to that arsenal there for Patrick Mahomes. And then staying in round number 3, a guy who's really on that fringe between the 3rd and 4th round. It's Eno Benjamin out of Arizona State. Reason being is the ball security, another guy who puts the ball on the ground way too often. But if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm sitting there with James Conner. And then after that, if you're looking behind him, this is a guy who started to wear down a little bit as the season wore on. And you've got Jalen Samuels, you've got Benny Snell behind him. And Jalen Samuels really is more of a fullback, and kind of a fullback tight end, jack of all trades type of a guy. They did bring in Derek Watt to be the fullback there. But Jalen Samuels, he's more of that utility guy. And I think you need to bring in another running back to compete with Benny Snell for that backup role. And I think what Eno Benjamin brings to the table are those hands. Ran a 4.57 40 at the combine, 39-inch vertical leap. I mentioned that 3-cone drill earlier. Ran a 6.97, so he was actually faster than Jonathan Taylor. And so that shows that he's able to sink his hips, get in and out of his breaks really quickly, and a guy who is going to beat you, with his lateral cuts. What I really like about Eno Benjamin, he worked with LaDainian Tomlinson, and he has this spin move, and it's really hard to tackle a guy who's spinning as he's coming at you. And so a lot of broken tackles. That's one of the things Pro Football Focus had him, noted as one of the top running backs in terms of broken tackles. So over 1,600 yards as a sophomore with 35 receptions. In 2019, they had a freshman come in there at quarterback, and Jalen Daniels and Arizona State doing things a little bit differently. Eno Benjamin wasn't always showcased as a running back there. More of a receiver, still went over 1,000 yards, but had 42 receptions, 82 in his career. I look at him and I look at Jalen Samuels, who also offers a lot in the passing game. I think those are your pass catchers to go along with more of the power running game of James Conner and Benny Snell. So I think that's really where Pittsburgh goes in round number 3. Looking at round 4, I've got 4 running backs that are coming off the board here. I'm looking at Anthony McFarland out of Maryland going to the Jets. I really like this pick there for the Jets, and I think 4th round feels about right for that as well. He's 5'8", 208, ran a 4.4 4.40 at the combine. So he's very, he's electric, a guy who can be a game breaker, very elusive in the open field. He's a redshirt sophomore. And, over 1,000 yards as a redshirt freshman, and shared the backfield with Javon Leake. And so just 614 yards on the ground. But I really like his shiftiness. I like his ability to be a game breaker. And when you look at the Jets, obviously you have Le'Veon Bell. And Le'Veon Bell is going to be your workhorse. We know this. But, they had Elijah McGuire as a backup, who was kind of the guy that was going to catch the football out of the backfield. Now you have Trenton Cannon, Kenneth Dixon, Josh Adams on the roster. I think you need to find another running back. And I think this could be a guy that can come in there, be that complement to Le'Veon Bell, and be a guy that can be a weapon in the passing game. Though he wasn't really featured in the passing game for Maryland, I like his elusiveness, his shiftiness, and he's a guy that I think is probably going to end up being a better pro than he was a college player. And obviously that's just my opinion. Colts. Mentioned the running game earlier, and I'm looking at the Colts here in round number 4, and Marlon Mack is your starter. Behind him, you've got Nyheim Hines, who's kind of the pass catcher. And then you've got Jordan Wilkins, who's going to kind of be your power back. But when I look at Indy, if Marlon Mack can stay healthy, obviously he'll probably end up being the bell cow for them at the running back position. But when you talk about Marlon Mack, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. So is he going to be a guy that they can re-sign? Is he going to ask for too much money? That's going to be a big concern. And I'm looking at a guy who, when he declared for the draft, I remember saying in my podcast, I hope he does something at the combine to really set himself apart, because I think he's a dynamic running back, and I didn't want to see him get lost in the shuffle. And that's Darrington Evans, 5'11", 203 out of Appalachian State, shows up, runs a 4.4 140. Showcases a 37-inch vertical leap as well, but that 4.4 140, second fastest only to Jonathan Taylor. And so that really kind of set him apart. I think people really took notice and wanted to go back and watch some more film of Darrington Evans. And when you put the game film on, you're going to see a running back who was very explosive, a guy that can make plays out in the open field, can run away from you, can be a weapon in the passing game as well. If you look at Evans and his numbers, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, 1,400 yards in 2019. a guy who just continued to get better as a pass catcher as well. 39 receptions in his career, and a guy who also returned 3 kickoff returns for touchdown. So he can be a dynamic playmaker there in the kicking game for Indy. And when you look at them, the kick return, they have Nyheim Hines as a kick returner, but Zach Pascal was kind of used as another kick returner. He's more of a big physical receiver. I think you get another running back in there to feature with Nyheim Hines. I think that makes a ton of sense for them. And round 4 would be a nice get. I think he's one of those sleepers in the draft. Raiders, I think they're also going to look for a sleeper in the running back position. I see them taking Keyshawn Vaughn out of Vanderbilt. And, you have Josh Jacobs there as obviously he's going to be your bell cow. Jalen Richard showed that he can be a complimentary back, was one of their leaders in receptions. But what I like about Keyshawn Vaughn is the explosiveness. He was one of those guys. He transferred into Vanderbilt from Illinois. And as a junior, you just saw, a guy that he plays faster than, with the pads on and when the lights are bright than what he ran at the combine. At the combine, he ran a 4.51, and I swear this guy was going to run much faster than that. He's 5'10", 214 pounds. When the lights are on, this guy's ready to go. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons for the Vanderbilt Commodores. Also 66 receptions in his career. He's very explosive. 21 touchdowns in the 2 seasons there at Vandy. And to me, you put him in there in that offense, and I could see him ultimately shining there as a backup to Josh Jacobs going forward. And he feels like one of those guys. He feels like a Mike Mayock type of guy, a guy that's going to be one of those sleepers, kind of flying under the radar, can be versatile and has some explosiveness to him. I like Keyshawn Vaughn to the Raiders in round 4. And then the last guy, another guy who I think could be a pass catcher. And I thought the hands, you really saw that, especially down the stretch for the Florida Gators. LaMichael Pirine. I think he's another guy who can be a fourth round running back. I had him kind of teetering between the 4th and 5th round, but I'm looking at the Philadelphia Eagles for LaMichael Pirine. And here's why. When you look at Philly, they have Miles Sanders, obviously tremendous year as a 2nd-round pick a season ago. But this was a team, they were loaded with all these different running backs. You had Donnell Pumphrey on the roster. You had Corey Clement on the roster. There were a lot of guys just loaded up at the running back position, and most of those guys are gone. The backup now is Boston Scott. You have Elijah Holyfield there as well. I think you need another running back. I think the Eagles are going to look for a running back at some point. And what you're getting out of LaMichael Pirine, again, is a guy who, he's not the most explosive running back, and you saw that at the combine, ran a 4.62 40, but he did put up 225 22 times, has some power to him, didn't run a 7.13 3-cone drill, not the most explosive, but, a guy who has some lateral quickness to him. And, what you're getting with Pirine, though, is a guy, 72 receptions in his career, including 40 this past season. He was a guy, when Felipe Franks went down and you had Kyle Trask, I thought Kyle Pitts, the tight end, and LaMichael Pirine were his security blankets. Those were the guys that he was really looking for. Van Jefferson was the leader at receiver, but I thought those were the 2 guys. Kyle Pitts is going to be a guy that could be talked about as a potential 1st-round pick at tight end in next year's draft. But Pirine, shared the backfield throughout his career. You had Jordan Scarlett there in the backfield with him as well for much of his time there in Gainesville. Just 493 carries in his career, 2,400 yards, still found the end zone 22 times, but it's the pass catching ability that I think, the versatility, and I think that's ultimately what gets him drafted there in the 4th round. But we're not done. I'm still looking. There are a lot of other running backs that we have on this group that we need to talk about. I think Salvon Ahmed out of Washington. I thought he was going to run a faster 40 time. Let's be honest. Ran a 4.62, 5'11", 197 pounds. This was a guy who was a versatile weapon for the Washington Huskies. A guy who played behind Myles Gaskin and really got a chance to showcase himself in 2019. Just let's see, just under 1,000 yards in his first 2 seasons there with the Huskies. Goes over 1,000 yards with just 188 carries, 11 touchdowns. And look, 50 receptions in his career as well. A guy that I think you can, line up in the slot, even split out if you need to. And I think he's the guy that the Saints need to find another running back to go with Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray. I think you need to add another receiver there, a guy that can be that pass catcher out of the backfield. And frankly, I think Salvon Ahmed could be that guy. Moving on to round number 6, the Cincinnati Bengals. I think the Bengals, ultimately, you've got Joe Mixon. You do have Giovanni Bernard still on the roster. Travion Williams was a 5th-round pick from a season ago. You also have Rodney Anderson in the backfield as well. But I think you need to add a running back to the mix. Really figure out what you're going to do there, what you really have in terms of that pecking order there in the backfield. And when you're looking at this running back group, Gio Bernard signed through the 2021 season. But Joe Mixon is going to be a free agent at the end of the year. So you want to make sure that in the event he does leave, that you are addressing that running back position at some point in this year's draft. And I'm looking at Mike Warren, nicknamed the Truck there at Cincinnati. And that was his game. He was running people over. Really a guy that found the end zone quite a bit. If you turned on that UCLA game as a sophomore, this was a guy, he would not be denied. I mean, every time he lined him up in the goal line, he was running people over to get into the end zone. That's really what Cincinnati does not have. They don't have a guy that you can plug in short yardage situations. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, back-to-back really over 1,200 yards in each of those seasons. 34 touchdowns in his career, but also 51 receptions. Showed his ability to catch the football out of the backfield for the Bearcats. I really like this pick, and I think he's a guy that can ultimately, he can potentially beat out, Rodney Anderson and potentially Travion Williams for a roster spot. I think, Mike Warren, look, 5'9", 226 pounds, big, physical, lower body strength, low pad level, low center of gravity, in his running style. I like the Truck there to Cincinnati in round number 6. Staying in round 6, Cleveland Browns. I think this is I'm looking for some of those versatile weapons. There are a lot of interesting running backs and receivers in this year's draft. They have Nick Chubb, they have Kareem Hunt in the backfield. After that, there really isn't a whole lot to speak of. I think they're going to go receiver as well because you have Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. And then, they've lost some of their guys there in that receiving core. Rashard Higgins is one of those that they no longer have on the roster. Things didn't work out with Antonio Callaway. They need receivers. They need another running back. And how about a guy by the name of Antonio Gibson who can be a little bit of both? And it's one of those guys. He's fun to watch. There's no doubt about that. He's built like a running back, and he has some breakaway speed. But he excelled as a receiver there for Memphis, along with DeMonte Coxey, catching passes from Brady White there for the Memphis Tigers. He ran a 4.39 40 at the combine, measured in at 6 foot and 228 pounds. So he sounds like a running back, but man, this guy is explosive. A guy that is returning kicks for touchdown. A guy who was running the ball into the end zone as well. And really just had one season there at Memphis where he really was able to showcase everything. 38 receptions, 735 yards, and 8 touchdowns. That equates to 19.3 yards per reception. 33 carries, 369 yards, 11.2 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns. And then you get into the kicking game and had 23 returns, 28-yard average, and took one to the house. But it wasn't just, the one touchdown. There were a lot of explosive plays in the return game. And so his versatility, his ability to be a receiver and a running back, I think that's really what the Bengals could use in their offense. Could he come off the board sooner? Absolutely. I think the question is where you're going to play him. And that's why he may fall. And I think the Browns, it seems like a perfect fit for me. I think the Bills are going to be looking for a running back as well. You don't have Frank Gore on the roster anymore, and you have the versatility and the elusiveness of Devin Singletary. You do have TJ Yeldon on the roster as well. But I'm looking at a guy out of an FCS school, James Robinson of Illinois State. This is a guy who was a production machine there for the Redbirds. Over 4,400 yards on the ground, including 1,917 yards in 2019. 44 touchdowns in his career on the ground, including 18 this past year, and then 58 receptions in his career. A guy who has some soft hands. He's powerfully built, and that's one of the things that I think you really saw even in the postseason. 5'9", 219. You saw him, with that power. Only ran a 4.64 40, so I don't think he has that burst that's going to run by you. But again, the physicality, he's got some big legs, is going to run through you, and those legs ultimately, deliver some lower body explosiveness. Though 40-inch vertical leap for a guy 5'9", 219 pounds, and then runs a 703 3-cone drill. So he has some of that lateral agility. He's going to be quicker than he is fast, and he has some of that versatility. He can catch the football out of the backfield, over 4,400 yards on the ground. 6th round, I think, would be a nice value for him. And the Bills, look, you put him in there in a backfield with Devin Singletary, TJ Yeldon, and I'd be pretty happy if I'm the Bills. We have 3 running backs coming off the board in round number 7, and then we're done with the podcast. So JaMycal Hasty is a back there with the Bills that I think, or with the Baylor Bears, a season ago, and Hasty, he's got the elusiveness. Another guy who's going to be quicker than he is fast. Over 1,900 yards on the ground, just under 2,000 in his career. 79 receptions, 3 straight seasons with at least 25 receptions. A guy who shared the backfield, so there isn't a ton of wear on his legs. Just 465 touches in his career with the Bears, but a guy 5'9", 205. And showed up at the combine, ran a 4.55 40, 39-inch vertical leap, has some of that lower body strength as well, lower body explosiveness, has some has the lateral quickness, able to make you miss in the open field, has a second burst, a second gear. And Jim Nagy really likes this guy. He had him at the Senior Bowl, really likes JaMycal Hasty, may come off the board sooner, but I couldn't find a place for him. But I'm looking at Minnesota in round number 7. And the reason for that, obviously you have Dalvin Cook. He's the bell cow. He's what really makes everything work on the ground for the Vikings. But you've got Alexander Mattison. And then after that, Amir Abdullah, Michael Boone, a lot of, I just think they don't have a guy on the roster that fits JaMycal Hasty, and his skill set. You might say, well, that's really what you just described Dalvin Cook. I don't think so. I think JaMycal Hasty is going to offer something a little bit different, and at least for the guys behind Dalvin Cook. So maybe he is a little bit more like Dalvin Cook, but Madison, there is Amir Abdullah on the roster, so okay, he is kind of that same type of a running back, but I think this is going to be a younger version of Amir Abdullah. Michael Boone's more of a physical runner. I think you could potentially be talking about this guy as your number 3 running back behind Cook and Madison when it's all said and done. Let's see. We're actually going to move on to the AFC South, excuse me. And we're going to take a look at Joshua Kelly out of UCLA. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons for the Bruins. And Joshua Kelly, look, he was a transfer, came in from an FCS school there in California. 2,300 yards on the ground for the Bruins, 24 touchdowns, also had 38 receptions. This guy is more of a one cut and go type of a guy. He's not going to be all that elusive in the open field, but a guy who I think can make you, he'll run you over, can make you miss, kind of an upright runner, going to go downhill. Still managed to run a 4.49 40, had that 6.95 3-cone drill. Not the only a 31-inch vertical leap, but a guy, again, with that 6.95, a guy who's going to be quicker than he is fast. And really the surprising thing is he ran that 4.49. You don't see that necessarily. And he was more of a one cut and go type of a runner. He has more tools in his tool belt. And you didn't always see it showcased there for the Bruins. A guy that, you want to see him really put his foot in the ground and get, allow him to have some of that lateral quickness. And I didn't see that all the time at UCLA. And I really want to see what he can do, because I think he can end up potentially being a backup for Derrick Henry there in Tennessee. Deion Lewis is gone. They have David Fluellen, Dalen Dawkins in the backfield there. And I think they need to find another running back. They could look for a back sooner in the draft. I mentioned some of those other backs who could be that pass catcher, a guy that could be a lot like Dion Lewis. But Joshua Kelly, if they wait till round number 7, I think that could end up being a guy that they could take. And then I mentioned the Dolphins were already taking a running back, taking DeAndre Swift at the beginning of the draft. I'm looking at end of the draft, potentially looking for another back. They're not going to use all of their draft picks. They've got so many draft picks in this year's draft. They're not going to use them all. But if they do, at least, decide they want to use another pick on a running back, I look at Kalen Ballage, kind of underachieved. You have Jordan Howard, who's going to be your complimentary back to DeAndre Swift. Myles Gaskin, may or may not, be on the roster. He's going to be one of those guys that's going to kind of be that on the bubble type of guy. I'm looking at Levante Bellamy. It might be a guy that can end up being on a practice squad and develop a little bit more. 5'9", 192, ran a 4.5 40, 39.5-inch vertical leap. Another guy who I think he has a bit of a burst, at least between the tackles, able to hit the hole in a hurry. Doesn't have that second gear that's going to outrun you, but I think the lateral agility is something that you definitely see with his running style there at Western Michigan. And, was a pass catcher there for the Broncos as well. 57 receptions in his career, but over 3,700 yards on the ground, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, 1,472 yards on the ground, 23 touchdowns. This is a guy who had a nose for the end zone, for the Broncos in the MAC. And I think he's a guy that should be drafted at some point. And, trying to figure out where he was going to go. I think 7th round feels about right. And the Dolphins, look, he can end up being their number 3 running back when it's all said and done. So when we're talking running backs, there are going to be some other guys that could potentially get drafted, guys that might be out there. Darius Jet Anderson, really a good pass catcher there for TCU, a guy that has runs that angle route to perfection, does a really good job getting open, ran a 4.6 40 at the combine, so you worry about things there a little bit. Moving down the group here, Javon Leake, really another guy just like Anthony McFarland, a guy who he's a bigger version of him. He's 6 foot, 215 pounds. Both of the guys squat 450 pounds, similar numbers this past season. I think he has a chance. Sewo Olanalua out of TCU, 6'3", 232 pounds, ran a 4.66 40. He's your power guy, the power back of this group. Scotty Phillips out of Ole Miss, 5'8", 209, ran a 4.56 40. A guy who can be a pass catcher in the open field. And then Patrick Taylor. Memphis has those backs that like to catch the football out of the backfield. He's another guy that can do that, 6'1", 217 pounds. He's a guy to keep an eye out for as well. So those are the quarterbacks and running backs, how I see that all shaking out in the draft, the guys who I think will get drafted, and some guys that I think can end up being priority free agents when it's all said and done. So that's going to be it for this podcast. We're going to go ahead and get another one released either tomorrow or the next day. We'll talk about the receivers and the tight ends, really taking a look at the depth of that wide receiver class and really where we think the tight ends are going to come off the board. There won't be a tight end coming off the board in round 1. How many will be off the board as day 2 picks? And then I think you'll see quite a few tight ends come off the board in day 3. So stay tuned. Hope you enjoyed the content. We'll go ahead and do this all over again here in the next couple of days. And look, we're going to have some Fast and Furious podcasts. I think I've got another 4 or 5 podcasts that I really want to put together, breaking down positions. We'll look at the wide receivers and tight ends. As I said, we're going to go ahead and then take a look at the offensive line. After that, we'll take a look at the defensive line, the linebackers, and then the secondary to round things out. And then I still have my final mock draft. We'll take a look at that the day before the draft. I'll get that released and out, and we'll see how things play out there on April 23rd. So for readyforthedraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Hope you've enjoyed everything. Stay safe, everyone. And we'll do this all again here in a couple of days. Until then, take care, and I am out of here.